Part of my company is an event company, so I do photography. So yeah, I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I think that that's important because I think that when I started thinking about, okay, well, what am I going to talk about for the Business Women's Roundtable, I really wanted to talk first about what a woman is and the fact that as women, like we really need to stand together. So I found this picture of these beautiful women, right? And it says the most beautiful women in the world. And I showed it to my sons and I showed it to my sister and my husband, and they all agreed, right? Like, that those are really, really beautiful women. And that there are some women that are missing and some representations of women that are missing in this photo. The first thing that stood out to me was that they really didn't have any women who are dark skinned, right? So they do have some women of color, but they don't have any dark skinned women. And dark skinned women are beautiful too, right? Like, we are women, we have just as much value as any other woman. In my family in particular, my mother is very, very, very dark, and my sister is very dark, and I'm less dark, but we're all wonderful and we all have value, and that's something that's really important to me. The only other thing that I really wanted to bring up is that there are cis women and there are trans women, and women, and women face women's issues, and so I definitely feel like whenever I have an opportunity to bring that to the forefront, that's something that I should do. So no matter what kind of women we are, doing business as a woman is really, really difficult, right? And it's difficult for a lot of reasons. Like, we all know about the wage gap, right? We all know that we make 77 cents to every dollar that men make. But I was even surprised when I looked this up, and that's that women and girls do 12 billion billion with the B, y'all, hours of unpaid care work every day, right?
Wow.
So when we're thinking about, as women, what do we want? What are we needing? What are we asking for so that we can get our rightful place beside men, sometimes ahead of them, but
Mm-hmm.
beside men? And that's not anything extra. It's just to be paid and considered for the work that we're already doing, right? Like, these are things that we're already doing. They're already valuable, many times more valuable than some of the things that people choose to pay us for. So I started to think even more about, well, what does it mean to be a success for a woman in business? Like, we can think about money, but we know that we only get 77 cents to the dollar. So um, I was talking to a lot of people. My husband, in particular, he has to listen to all of my rants about everything and kind of process things with me. And we thought about Jerry Maguire, right? Like, show me the money. Like, this is all about, like, success. Like, when you get the money, then you have made it, right? And then we decided, look, like, no, that really isn't it. Like, there has to be more. And then we thought about my friend Drake, and my friend Drake said he wants the money and the cars and the hoe, and the clothes and the hose. He supposes, and then that is what's going to make him successful. And I was, yeah, no, that isn't it for me either, right? Definitely not those things. And so, what then does it take to be a success as a woman and as a leader, right? So, we're thinking about being successful and we're thinking about being leaders, and the fact of the matter is that as women who want to try to be successful and want to try to be leaders, we're damned if we do and doomed if we don't, right? So we know that women, when we get into leadership positions, when we're making the money and maybe having the cars and the other things, possibly, that there are really extreme perceptions, that women are seen as too soft or too hard or too tough or too slight, but we can never be just right, right? And that is always what we're told, even though we know that that isn't true. It can't be the case that every single woman just isn't quite right. What it is definitely the case is every single woman isn't quite a man, right? And so that part we can definitely understand. There's also a really high competence threshold, and I bring that up because I know from the conversations that I just had, and I think from the conversations that you all had on this other side of the room, that that is something that hits us really, really hard, right? Like we have to go in and work hard and harder and harder and harder, and it's never gonna matter, right? Because we're never gonna be just right, because we're never gonna be a man, right? And then for the very, very, very few of us, right, who are actually seen as competent, then people don't like us. It's just something about her. I don't know. It's just something about her that I just don't like. I think that it's really important for me to bring up that very often who I hear this narrative from is other women, and it's harmful. It's hurtful, and it's not okay. That woman is never going to be a man. That woman is standing in her space. She's really, really working hard to be the best version of herself. And I purport that that is just right. Right? So every woman is different. Every leader is different. But for me, I am driven by two things. One of them is justice. I am driven by an extreme sense that my purpose on earth is to help other people to be able to be themselves, right? I could have chosen a lot of pictures to stand for justice, but I am black. And this picture is really important to me. It's really, really important to me that black people and other people of color, that trans people, that poor people, that people who do not that women that people who are not starting here are able to get here. The other reason that I chose this picture is this picture. This is my why. These are my sons. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about them during this presentation. But if I didn't do anything else right and no one ever liked me, as long as they do and as long as I've done right by them, mission accomplished. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my leadership journey. And as I was thinking about this, I was like, I need to see my therapist. None of this is okay. So as I go through it, if you're like, whoa, I did the exact same thing. So um, I will tell y'all that I was born in Charlottesville. I used to live in Garrett Square. It is now called Friendship Court. It was not Friendship Court when I lived there. It was Garrett Square, and uh, there were some traumatic experiences in my early childhood that kind of drove us out and away from Charlottesville. Um, and I'm choosing not to say what those traumatic experiences are because it kind of doesn't matter, right? Like everyone can point to some level and some types of trauma, and everyone's trauma is going to impact them differently. And so that is kind of the point, right? Sometimes when we're working through life, we're responding to past traumas and we don't really know it. So we ended up in Orange County, Virginia, and I went to Orange Elementary School. And I will say this, my teachers from third grade on were amazing. They believed in me. They pushed me. They helped me. I had a teacher in third grade named Miss Oliver. And we had three reading groups, and one of them was a silent reading group, and one of them was her reading group, and the other one was my reading group. She let me lead reading groups in the third grade. I had the basil, and I sat with them, and I asked them questions, and I helped them sound out words. And then I was like, oh, teaching is fun. Like, I want to be a teacher. And I did become a teacher because Miss Oliver put her whole self behind me and definitely positively lifted me up. After coming from Orange Elementary School, I went to Prospect Heights Middle School. And thinking back, this is one of the pieces that I'm like, oh no, that wasn't right. When we entered Prospect Heights Middle School, there were three teams on the sixth grade. You could be on one of three teams in sixth grade. They were the gold team, the silver team. Can anyone guess the third
Bronze?
one? The red team, not even bronze, right? So I was like, oh my gosh, And even then, at 11, I was like, that doesn't seem right. I had a cousin who was in my class, kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth, and fifth grade. Sixth grade, I went on the gold team. She went on the red team. I have my doctorate. She barely graduated high school. I say that to say, as we are leading and as people are following us, especially young people, we have to be really, really careful about the path that we carve out for folks. Moving on, I went to Orange County High School, and y'all, I had the best time in high school. Yeah,
Can I ask a question? Sorry to
absolutely.
interrupt you. What is the teams like? What were they? They just during the school like they all had teams?
Absolutely. So during school, I was on the gold team, and so I did things like I took Latin as a sixth grader. I took Spanish one as a sixth grader. We went on all sorts of field trips that no one else went on. We didn't have like word study or like spelling because we already knew everything. So they definitely just took all of these kids who they felt like were on a high academic track and put them here. And then there were some other kids who maybe were going to make it and put them here. And then they put the rest of the children on the red team. So,
Wow.
right.
Sounds like
Wow.
Bruce, basically.
I've
Who
never
does
heard
that,
of
right?
So I'm just
Wow.
curious.
So, and again, at the time, I knew, hey, that doesn't seem right, right? But didn't really feel like I had a voice or any way to speak up and try to help. So when I went to high school, I was really coming into myself, or as I thought, right, like as I was 14, coming into myself. Um, but I was also noticing that even very early on in high school, a lot of my friends, especially my friends from the red team, were pregnant. So Orange County at that time had one of the highest teen pregnancy rates in the state. Um, Now, I would always say we don't have a bowling alley, we don't have a movie theater. Like, please give the children something to do because they're finding things to do. Um, so this picture actually represents the fact that I, starting in 10th grade, taught sex education classes at my high school to try to teach people about STDs and to try to teach people about safe sex and to try to teach people about other options and to really, really try to help all my friends stop getting pregnant. Because I knew that that wasn't going to be good for them no matter what team, right? So I was also ninth grade class president and 10th grade class president and 11th grade class president. And the only reason I wasn't 12th grade class president is because at my school you couldn't actually be 12th grade class president and student council president. So I wanted to be student council president, so that's what I did. I also did band and color guard and Future Farmers of America and Future Business Leaders of America and Key Club, and I was the softball manager. I was the Hornet. I I came out and danced. And I did everything. I did everything I could. Um, and I didn't really understand why at the time, but it just felt right. Like there's an opportunity, you seize it, you do it. From 10th to 12th grade, I also worked 30 plus hours a week during the
Wow.
school year, waiting tables while I was doing all of these other things. And
Did you figure out how to not sleep?
absolutely, right?
Wow.
Sleep. Who does
It's one of
that?
those, Hermione the Turner thing,
Mhm.
where you can be in two places at once.
It was
Oh my goodness.
it was a
Wow.
lot, and it just didn't stop, right? Um, and there is a point to me telling you all this. I also maintained a 3.96 GPA.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Now I want y'all to take a minute and I want you to think. And this is not something to share, but I just want you to think. So think to yourself whether or not you have experienced trauma and how that trauma has affected you and how it still affects you today. And now my point is that I wish someone would have told me then that overworking is a trauma response, right? So from the time I was about, I'm going to say 10, and had any ability to shape what my life looked like on a daily basis, I just did everything. Everything. And my brain was so busy, and it felt good though, right? Because people were encouraging, oh, you're so smart, oh, you're so helpful, right? But I did not view that as a trauma response, but it was. Sorry, that's a repeat. So I finished up high school and I went to VCU for 1 year. I had all A's, but I didn't go to class because I had worked so hard in high school that going to class wasn't really necessary. So I saw a rat like this big run across the sidewalk and into my dorm. And then I put in my transfer papers because that is not my life. Like, it just, I was like, I don't belong here. And I left. And I ended up going to Mary Washington College in Fredericksburg. Fun fact is that I was there. I got my bachelor's when it was Mary Washington College, and then it changed over to to the University of Mary Washington the next year, and that's when I got my master's. During undergrad and grad school, I worked 30 plus hours a week at a restaurant, the same one where I worked during high school, and I also was a nanny for 20 plus hours a week and took 21 credit hours. So when I moved from VCU to Mary Washington, there was a need for me to recover some credits because everything didn't transfer. I also was really well aware that if I'm already getting financial aid to cover this amount, right, and that is tuition and fees and room and board, I could take 12 credits, but that would be silly, right? Like, why wouldn't I take the most that I could take, because then I'm getting the most out of my education. So yeah, sleeping wasn't happening, but I learned a lot and continued to push myself. And so I graduated, and then I got married, and I adopted a kid at 24. This is my godson. He is now 20 years old. He's number 85 here. He plays football at Hampton Sydney University. Um, and it just felt right, right? So we were his godparents, and his mom fell on some hard times and had some more children that she wasn't able to take care of. He was with my husband's parents, and they were like, oh God, we need help taking care of this kid. And so we were like, yep, that's us. um, so I had a kid, and I was coming out of college, and everything was good. And I wish at that time that someone would have told me that overworking was a trauma response, but they didn't. So I went to work at BF Yancey Elementary School. Now, what you should know about Yancey is that um, all of the good things that I know, and that's not number one. That when I went there, it was the worst performing school in the county, one of the worst performing schools in Virginia, but has the best people, the best kids, the best parents, such a supportive community. When I went there, I actually started before I graduated, and because they needed a teacher for a kindergarten class. I was their fourth teacher that year. Their first teacher at Christmas break went home and said, I am not coming back. They are terrible monsters. Get them away from me. And so they got a new teacher. And it was a substitute, and that teacher lasted 2 weeks and then tapped out. And then they had another long term sub, and she felt like she was going crazy, and so she tapped out. And then I came and was like, oh my gosh, a challenge. Um, and these kids, first of all, the children were absolutely wonderful. They needed structure, as children do. But I was very, very privileged to have taught them that last, I think it was 8 weeks of kindergarten. And then because I stayed there, I taught them as fourth graders and fifth graders. Um, One just got her master's in counseling. Two are lawyer. They were always wonderful kids. They just needed a little bit of structure. The other thing that I want to point out about Yancey, because anytime I get a opportunity to talk about my beautiful school, I will, is if you look at this, you will see that what you hear about Yancey is that they have really, really low test scores, right? So if you look at this green line here, this is really low. This is an 18% pass rate here. But I think that what's really important is that no one looks up here, right? That's me. I taught at Yancey at that time, and I taught mathematics. I taught all fourth and fifth grade mathematics, and then when I didn't feel like the third graders were getting what they needed, I asked for them too. And then I taught all third, fourth, and fifth grade mathematics at Yancey Elementary School. And then this is the year I went to Burley. Now I purport that they had a 48.53% pass rate because many of my children who I had taught in third and fourth grade could have passed the next year's test at the end of the year when I taught them because I wasn't teaching them material as much as I was teaching them how to think. And when you know how to think, the test really isn't difficult. So the test scores continued to go down and really had a hard time rebounding. I want to also point out is that if you look, there's also an upward trend here in language arts. So my beautiful friend Jennifer Tucker taught language arts fourth and fifth grade. I remediated language arts. She remediated math, and we worked together to lead the students, to look the parents in the eye, and to remind them that we believe in their babies. We believe in them as parents. We know that they're working. It's not their problem. Um, so that's just kind of a side note. I know people tell you a lot of things about Yancey, but please, if someone says something negative, remember this. So then I went to Jackson P. Burley Middle School, and people ask me why I went to Burley. My heart is still at Yancey. I went to Burley because I started realizing that my kiddo was going to need to go to college and I needed some money to pay for it. And so I went to Burley not because they pay any more money, but I went to Burley because if you teach for 5 years at an elementary school, you can get, I think it's around $7,000 worth of student loan forgiveness if you teach at a Title I school. But if you teach math or science at a middle school, you can get almost $18,000 in loan for forgiveness. So I went to Burley so that I could go back to school. So I did this thing where I actually enrolled in 2 doctoral programs at once while I was working full time with, at this point, 3 kids. And the BCU doctoral program was for a doctorate in the teaching of mathematics. At the time, I was really upset about this, but thankfully, what ended up happening is the person leading that program got a job in Cambridge and moved. And so they just kind of let it go. But I was able to, I think I took like 6 classes, and then I also got a certificate in e-teaching and learning from UVA. And then I continued with my my educational specialist degree from Liberty because that would allow me to be a school administrator. And I finished that in like a year and a half, and I was really proud of myself. And I was like, okay, well, that's done, and I feel like I have free moments, so clearly I should get my doctorate. So I did, and you asked earlier about sleep, and so this is when I never drank coffee until I started getting my doctorate, and then it was like, oh, I can sleep or drink coffee, and so coffee it was. There were many, many days that I literally would come home from work, shower, feed my kids, go downstairs and write until 6 a.m. and I would shower again and go back to work. But I finished in a year and a half, and I was really proud of myself.
Sounds familiar.
Yes. But I wish at that time that someone would have told me, and that's why I'm trying to tell you and anyone else under the sound of my voice that overworking is a trauma response. Give that a moment to just sink in because it hits me hard. So then I went to Walton Middle School. Um, After I graduated with my doctorate, I was basically told that I wasn't ready to be a school administrator, and that what I needed to do was to be an administrative intern first. And I said, no, that doesn't feel quite right, because I know that there are male idiots that you all are letting lead schools, and that's not going to work for me. And so the job that I got was at Walton Middle School. Now I want y'all to think about what you know about Walton Middle School. I want you to think about media covers that you may have seen, but I also want you to think about maybe things that you haven't seen. Okay? So just like Yancey, people will put forward whatever narrative they want, but they don't tell the good things. When I first went to Yancey, we were in the paper all the time about how horrible the students were, and discipline and test scores, and none of it was true. But I would clip every single one and hang it on our wall. And because we would talk about, like, they are talking about you, like, you have to prove these people wrong, like, this is not okay, right? And my babies just chest out did exactly what they needed to. So the same is true about Walton, but did y'all ever see this? Basically, when I went to Walton, this is in November of 2016. I went in 2015. And so what we were able to do was to drop the number of discipline referrals by more than 80%. Right? These are same kids. It was largely the same teachers, right? It was a new approach to discipline that made the kids feel like people, right? And that said, hey, when they got off the bus, I could see that they were having a bad day, so I'm gonna take them for a walk before I send them to class. That said, hey, this person is getting a little antsy. Can they do something else for 5 minutes? It's really, really important to me that justice is part of my leadership journey, that I'm creating space for people to be the best version of themselves. And that is what I really worked hard to do at Walton. The other thing that I want to mention is when I went to Walton, unbeknownst to me, because sometimes people don't tell things, but if we had not made accreditation numbers that very first year that they had me as a new assistant principal and my boss as a new principal, the school would have been taken over by the state. All right? But of course we did because children just need structure and teachers need support, and to know that they are cared for and cared about, and that we understand where they're coming from. And so not only did we increase our reading test scores by 8% that year to make accreditation, when an increase of 4% is almost unheard of. But then our math scores also went up quite a bit too. I say this to say, sorry, this is one other side note. When I was in AP there, I walked into the bathroom because someone said, oh, Dr. Jones-Lewis, someone wrote on the bathroom wall. And this is what they wrote. I love Walton Middle School, go Wildcats. Now, the English major in me wanted them to capitalize that W. I really did. I almost went in with a Sharpie and did it for them, but what was important is that they did. They loved the school. They were learning. They were thriving. I think that while I was at Walton, because I had such a great boss and such great people to work with, such great students, such great parents, just greatness all around me, I was finally able, oh, and a great therapist that helped. But I was finally able to acknowledge that overworking is a trauma response, right? And that hasn't necessarily stopped me from overworking, but at least I know what it is. I know how to call it. I know that I can stop if I need to. All right. Check my clock here. Oh, I'm over. I'll go really fast. Um, I went to the Equity Center at the University of Virginia because of these three, right? Because they they need me. So today I am the director of community research at the University of Virginia. I lead lots of different programs, and I also teach in the School of Education and Human Development. These are some of my fellows from this year's cohort. Libby is actually a fellow from last year's cohort that I also lead. I do program evaluation and try to help to really glean information that's going to help to move everyone forward. This one was on COVID-19 wraparound services that allow people to shelter in place when they were sick, regardless of income. I'm leading a program from the Equity Center and that works with FAR, who are the real leaders in establishing a community arm of the IRB board that will protect people from harmful research and help them to do their own research that is not only not extractive but adds real benefit to their communities. Lo siento. And I work with the President's Council, which has some working groups that are trying to make meaningful change here in the university community. So now that I'm able to acknowledge that overworking is a trauma response, I'm really working, and sometimes overworking to ensure that others are able to do the same. This is my favorite quote, and I used to always read it to my students. And the reason that I have these pictures is that this quote belongs to Marianne Williamson. It's from Return to Love, but it's very often attributed to Nelson Mandela, right? Because he has penis. So they were like, oh, he said it. But it's brilliant, and it definitely is one that can motivate people. So as I end, I just want to encourage everyone to be the best you that you can be and to conquer your fears, because it really does matter. But don't overwork yourself. I am working hard, really hard, because Isis Lewis, who's an African American male, 20 years old, will not be a statistic. He is my son. And Che Lewis, African American male, age 14, will not be a statistic because he is my son. And Langston Lewis, African American male, age 11, will not be a statistic. He's my son. So I thank you all very much. I hope that you've learned something from my leadership lesson.
Thank you so much, Sherica. Does anybody have any questions?
Well, my question is really, so thank you for sharing with us. You're such an impressive person, and just that you have the capacity to overwork like that is, I'm admiring it while also I'm stunned by it. But